Once again, YouTube says that I am live. I apologize. Technical difficulties, as I've often said on my YouTube channel. I am a one-man show. My name is Gordy Canuck. My real name is, that's my internet sobriquet. My real name is Gordon Causey. You're watching Act One, a Canadian take on news events. And tonight, what I'm going to be talking about tonight is about how the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC News to Canadians, how it has become, sadly, a propaganda tool for Hamas, the governing authority in the Gaza Strip that is currently at war with the nation state of Israel, a war that has been raging better than 2 years now, or coming up on 2 years, not yet 2 years. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties I experienced earlier. I am in a rural location in southeastern Ontario, Northumberland County, farming country, and internet connections are not always the most robust. Candy is my dog, Candy the Wonder Dog, and anyone who's been on my channel knows pretty much 99.9% of my live stream videos. She jumps all over me because she has trained me that before I can do a video, before I get any peace, I have to give her a treat. So speak, Linda, speak. She's in good voice tonight. And there she goes. Oh, warning, this is going to be a bit of a rant. I do not like CBC News. I do not like the mainstream media reporting in Canada at all. And that came crashing down big time. My opinion of CBC wasn't the highest before COVID, but after COVID, any semblance of trust in the objectivity of CBC News got thrown out the window. Nancy is here, aka Eat Me, and is telling me to rant away. I cannot stand CBC News. During the COVID era, for lack of a better word, there was an instance where Dina Hinshaw, the chief medical officer of health for the province of Alberta, gave a press conference announcing that the province, she said, had just experienced its youngest ever COVID death. This was just prior to the authorization of the COVID vaccines for children. And she got up on the podium. It was almost like she couldn't wait to share this news, in my opinion. And she, said that a young man, 14 years of age, had just died of COVID, youngest ever death from COVID. And the media did not push her at all. She told the media that, yes, while it is true that the child had underlying health conditions, he was still tested positive for COVID, and the cause of death was being listed as COVID. And rather than pushing her and saying, well, what exactly was the underlying health conditions? Was it a life-threatening medical health condition? What can you give us any details? They didn't press her at all. They actually went so far as to say, why are you mentioning underlying health issues? That takes away the weight of the news. They were mad at her for even giving that modicum little bit of detail. And if anyone knows this story, knows that the child had not died of COVID. He had terminal stage 4 brain cancer, was in palliative end of life care, and they knew he was going to die. And what they did to this child is, just prior to his death, they subjected this suffering child to a nasal colonoscopy, that horrible and widely inaccurate PCR test. Probably, I would imagine, this is a guess on my part, but I'd bet on it. They probably ramped the amplification cycle up to 35, 40 to ensure they had the best possible chance at a positive so that they could put his death into the COVID column, a death that was caused by stage 4 terminal brain cancer, glioblastoma. And then when it came to light, the CBCs, the CTVs, the global newses all refused to report on it. It was only thanks to the Western Standard, an alternative media outlet. They ran it up a high flagpole. It started to be shared virally on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. Look, they're lying again. And at that point, Dina Hinshaw was forced to issue a public apology, said, "We made a mistake. It was an error in judgment." And do you think the coverage of her admitting that mistake got the same amplification as it did when she was announcing the kid had died of COVID? Of course not. When they lie, they scream. When they are forced to admit that they've been caught, then they whisper. Another example, CBC News Edmonton went to air with a newscast, and in the background, on the green screen, while they were reporting on COVID, they had an image of a patient hooked up to a ventilator in an ICU. Scary image. Thankfully, in today's digital age, there were eagle-eyed observers of the news. I'm yesing to what Amy just wrote. She said they probably cranked it to 40 cycles. Some eagle-eyed, so the CBC in Edmonton, CBC News Edmonton, reporting on the COVID numbers, picture of a patient hooked up to a ventilator, but some internet users streaming the newscast did a freeze screen, they amplified the picture, and they could see clearly that the patient hooked up to a ventilator was not a patient. In fact, it was a mannequin. And that started to spread all over the internet, and it was unethical. Proof that it was unethical came when the director of CBC News Edmonton was forced to issue a public apology. He said, and again, echoing the same terms that Dina Hinshaw used, "We made a mistake. It was an error in judgment." Garbage. You're telling me you haven't taken media ethics, journalistic ethics 101? Fine, if you want to show that image, go ahead, just disclose. This is huge in journalism. Journalism, Canadians are supposed to rely on media outlets like the CBC, CTV, Global. When they're presenting news coverage, we expect them to be unbiased. If they, during that Edmonton newscast, if they had said, the image that we are displaying and behind on the screen here is of a mannequin hooked up to a ventilator. We wanted to give our viewers the impression of what a patient would look like. However, the image we're displaying is that of a mannequin. If they do that, they've disclosed. Now they're operating ethically. CBC News is unethical, and they are biased. And that bias continues into the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Hamas is fighting for its survival. It just to put a fine point on things, in 2002, so almost 25 years ago now, Canada declared Hamas a terrorist organization. And yet, when CBC News engages in reporting on the conflict between Israel and Hamas, they cite Hamas officials and they present what they put out there as if it's fact without identifying that it's coming from, they never use the word Hamas. I'm going to share an article. This is with my internet connection being what it is. I hope this goes okay. Please bear with me if it does not, because I will be coming back. Let me make, looks like it. There it is. This is an article in CBC News, World News. This is not opinion. This is not an editorial. This is news. They actually picked this up from Reuters, Thomson Reuters. Thomson bought Reuters. Now it's Thomson Reuters. They are what used to be referred to as a wire service. CBC, NBC, any media outlet will go and they will pay to have these stories. And so why did they choose this story? I have no idea. At least 123 Palestinians killed as Israeli army pounds Gaza City ahead of planned takeover. Latest deaths come as Netanyahu reiterates that Palestinians should simply leave Gaza. Here's what the reporting says. Now, first, I want you to take note of this image. And it says a Palestinian woman carries the body of her granddaughter, medics, at a cemetery in Gaza City. And the picture is credited to Dawood Abu Al-Qas, an employee of aforementioned Reuters. Horrific picture, kind of thing that images play. In journalism, there is a old saying that goes, if it bleeds, it leads. And here we have blood, and the blood of a child. And if you want, remember COVID, they wanted to draw an emotional response, fear. They want to drive an emotional response here, likewise. And this picture is gut-wrenching. And this isn't even the worst I've seen. And I will get back to Dawood Abu Al-Qas in a minute. Well, let's read the article. Israel's military pounded Gaza City on Wednesday prior to a planned takeover with another 123 people killed in the last day, according to Gaza's health ministry. Oh, government officials. Oh, sounds wonderful. Who is Gaza's health ministry? That is Hamas. Hamas, an organization that Canada recognizes as a terrorist organization. If I wanted to propagandize this on the side of the Israelis, I would say I could write it up in an entirely different fashion and saying Hamas officials claiming that 123 people were killed in the last day. And then I would note that Hamas does not make a distinction between militants, combatants, and the civilian population. They don't give a breakdown. They just give you one big global number. And from their perspective, the bigger, the better. And Hamas, thanks to media outlets like CBC, is winning the propaganda war. I'll read a little bit more, but not too much more. The 24-hour death toll was the worst in a week and added to the massive fatalities from the nearly 2-year war that has shattered the enclave, home to more than 2 million Palestinians. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated an idea, also enthusiastically floated by U.S. Donald Trump, who the CBC has gone into overdrive in wanting Canadians to hate him. And they've been very successful. So there's a nice little association there that Palestinians should simply leave. Of course, they need somewhere to go. They're not being pushed out. They'll be allowed to exit, he told Israeli television channel I-24 News. All those who are concerned for the Palestinians and say they want to help the Palestinians should open their gates and stop lecturing us. But is Canada letting in Palestinians? Is any country in the Arab world letting in Palestinians? No, sadly, by both Hamas and those who are refusing to give refuge, they are being used as cannon fodder. Arabs and many world leaders are aghast at the idea of displacing the Gaza population, which Palestinians say would be like another Nakba. The Nakba is an Arabic word, typically translated into catastrophe, as they do here, when hundreds of thousands fled or were forced out during the 1948 war. That's called either the First Arab-Israeli War, or conversely, Israelis refer to it as their War of Independence. And it was a catastrophe, a humiliating catastrophe for the Arab world, the Arab League, all the nations that invaded. They thought it was going to be a walk in the park. We've got a one-day-old nation, 800,000 Jewish men, women, and children, Jewish Palestinians. There are hardly any of them. We're going to steamroll them. They'll all be dead, pushed into the sea, or they'll be gone. And then you'll be able to come back, they said to the Arab Palestinians, once we kill and get rid of all the Jewish Palestinians. And surprise, surprise, the Jewish Palestinians managed to capture some territory. The Gaza Strip was actually captured by the Egyptians. They captured it. That was Egyptian territory. Then, when Egypt went to war again with Israel in 1967 during what is referred to as the Six-Day War, then they lost the Gaza Strip and Israel took control of it. This is what happens. Study world history. Countries attack. If they win, they seize territory. If they lose territory. It's been happening for all of human history. Israel's planned recapture of Gaza City, which it took in the early days of the war before withdrawing, is probably weeks away, officials say. What officials? That means a ceasefire is still possible, though talks have been floundering and conflict still rages. This is such garbage reporting. Officials say. Which officials? If they won't name, say requesting anonymity because they are not authorized to speak on behalf of the government, say something, not just officials say. Is a ceasefire still possible? I think that's an open question. I don't think it is. But what do I know? Israeli planes and tanks bombed eastern areas of Gaza City heavily, residents said, with many homes destroyed in the Zaytun and Shahia neighborhoods overnight. Al Ali Hospital said 12 people were killed in an airstrike on a home in Zaytun. I'm not sure how to pronounce all these things. Welcome to war. Let's look at what happened. Look at what happened in World War II, when Allied bombers killed tens of thousands of German, mostly the elderly women and children. Tens of thousands. We don't know how many we killed during that 2-day bombing raid. Some estimates put it as high as 100,000 German civilians killed over just 2 days. But that's what happens in war. And there's this annoying double standard where will forgive all crimes of every other country. But if Israel does what every other country in the world has done, all of a sudden it is the worst thing ever. And I am not here to suggest that Israel is without any blame here, that they're perfect and ideal and, et cetera, et cetera. War is brutal. Anyway, let me stop sharing. I want to take you that picture. Remember that picture I showed you of someone reported to be a grandmother holding an enshrouded body of what's said to have been her grandchild, with blood on the linen or whatever, the cloth wrapping the child. Who took that picture? I said it before. It's Dawood Abu al-Kaths. I'm not sure how to pronounce these names. I want to show you his profile pic from his Instagram page. I need to scroll up a bit. Not there. See how that's rendering on my live stream? Anyone notice what's flying in the background here of this picture? That is the Palestinian flag. It's clear to me that this quote unquote journalist, and I use that term loosely, is displaying to the world his bias. He's got a Palestinian flag clearly in his profile picture. And that automatically, if the CBC, if Reuters, any responsible news outlet would automatically disqualify this individual from doing any reporting in a news fashion on the conflict between Israel and Hamas, because he clearly has a bias. And Canadians should expect more from our media. If I am a card-carrying member of the Liberal Party of Canada and there is reporting being done on the Liberal Party, on Mark Carney, I should automatically be discounted as being able to work on a story covering the Liberal Party because of my bias. Now, an op-ed piece, an opinion piece, an editorial, Bob's your uncle, fill your boots, go ahead. But not if I'm reporting, not if I'm offering what is supposed to be unbiased news media coverage. This is mind-blowingly simple, and yet CBC is basically, to my mind, they have thrown their lot fully in, and they have said, we're dancing to Mark Carney's tune. Mark Carney is he and many of the others in the globalist camp, the International Court of Justice, the UN, these lovely bodies that everyone loves to rail against, except when it comes to the issue of Israel. Except when it comes to the issue of Israel. When it comes to Israel, then yay UN, yay globalists, yay WEF types, we love you now. Because people hate Jews and they hate all things Jewish, and you don't get anything. You put the two together and you have the nation state of Israel. I've just done a rant about bias. What is my bias? You may ask, and that would be a reasonable question. This guy's got to be Jewish, some might say. I'm not. I'm a Christian, not Jewish, not Palestinian or Arab or Muslim either. I'm a Christian. So I don't have a foot in either camp. What is Emi's writing, the unaliving of 4 journalists was not so cool. It was a message to stay away and stop reporting on the ground. Right now, because this conflict is so propagandized on both sides, I've almost washed my hands of the reporting on it. I'm curious. I want to see what's going to happen. I've stated my views on this previously, and I'll reiterate them again. That attack on October 7, 2023, when Hamas militants broke through the perimeter fence and launched their attack, the music festival, going into kibbutzes with Hamas and their media outlets and their body cam footage showing the massacre, and immediately after it, issuing their senior leadership, putting out videos and issuing statements saying this is just the beginning. We're going to kill them all. We're taking it. We're going to wipe Israel off the map. Forget the 2-state solution. We want them gone from the river to the sea, from the Jordan River right through to the Mediterranean. That's all of Israel. And there was reporting that I believe, some would call this conspiracy, but I do believe that Israel, Netanyahu, and his inner circle I do believe they knew this was coming. It's been reported in mainstream outlets like the Wall Street Journal that the United States Intelligence Service had given warning to the previous administration before Netanyahu came back into power, to the previous administration, that Hamas was planning this exact same type of attack, and it was dismissed both by the previous administration and by Netanyahu's administration. My belief is that Israel knew it was coming and that they decided to give Hamas a win. We'll let them get a win. There were a group of individuals, I think entirely women, who were referred to as the Watchers. That perimeter fence around Gaza was under 24/7, 365 closed circuit TV monitoring, and it was being watched constantly. And the individuals who were in charge, they would sit at TV screens watching the perimeter fence, and they saw the militants breaking through, and they sent out warnings to military and intelligence, the apparatus within Israel, and there was no response. They were left to die or to be taken hostage. My own personal opinion cannot prove this, but I think that that was intentional, and I think the intent behind it was to give Hamas a win so that Israel could do what it is doing. Now, is that justified? That's the question. Is it justified? I'm not saying right or wrong, just what is the justification behind it? The justification, as I see things, is this. You have a population, 2 million people in Gaza, and then you have another 5 million or so in Judea, Samaria, which is the western bank of the Jordan River. And these are two areas. Judea, Samaria used to belong to Jordan. Gaza used to belong to Egypt. They've never been Palestine. They went from being Ottoman ruled to British ruled to Egyptian and Jordanian ruled to Israeli ruled. That's the way the cookie crumbles. And the populations in those include a significant number of people who want Israel wiped off the map again, from the river to the sea. Hamas, in their founding charter called the Covenant of Hamas, states that as their ultimate goal, to eradicate the nation state of Israel and to occupy all of it. No two-state solution, one state. This gets under my skin. So Israel knows that it has this. I don't want to say the words that came to my mind were this malignant cancer. That they have a malignant cancer in Gaza on the western bank of the Jordan. And that it's not the best term to use, but I think it's along those lines. And we can just keep treating it, but the disease keeps intifada, uprising. When Israel, under, I believe it was Yitzhak Rabin, who was the previous prime minister of Israel, who vacated the Gaza Strip. Remember, again, Gaza had been conquered by Israel during the 1967 war, which was a war against between Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. It's always the Jewish Palestinians have always been up against it, huge in all their fights. It's never one-on-one. It's always a multi-headed beast coming at them. In the first war, it was Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, boom, Iraq, all coming at them. And that was a one-day-old nation, when the Jewish Palestinians numbered 800,000. And they had countries with populations in excess of 30 million attacking because it was a land grab. The British had left what remained of their mandate, and everyone wanted some land. Jewish Palestinians wanted to create a new nation state or a new modern nation state of Israel. and Jordan wanted territory, Egypt wanted territory, Syria wanted territory. And when the dust had all settled, the territory got broken into three. Jordan got some, is the Jewish Palestinians got some, the Egyptians got some. But it was a Nakba, it was a catastrophe. The Arab world had been humiliated, and 1967 was an attempt to avenge that humiliation, that catastrophe. And what ended up happening is Egypt lost Gaza, Jordan lost the West Bank, and they lost East Jerusalem, and Syria lost the Golan Heights. Catastrophe, humiliation, never got over. In 1973, they attacked again, called the Yom Kippur War. They waited until the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, launched a surprise attack, made some initial gains because the day of Yom Kippur, also known as the Day of Atonement, part of what are called the high holidays around the Jewish New Year of Rosh Hashanah. It's the equivalent of Ramadan, basically. As I understand Islamic teaching, Ramadan is the highest and the most significant of all Islamic holidays. Well, for the Jews, it's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur kicks off Rosh Hashanah. If I'm not Jewish, but I have read the Bible cover to cover, so I'm not completely out of my depth. At any rate, they attacked, and Israel held on to what Israel didn't conquer any new territory, but they held on to what they had previously conquered. And man, oh man, this whole situation is a mess. It just drives me crazy to see Mark Carney and our, his globalist buddies in Australia and England and goodness knows, all these countries. The little globalist camp is now throwing all in with the so-called Palestinian cause. And what I find so incredibly interesting is that there are conservative voices out there who are all of a sudden going all in with globalist forces. Normally, they don't, World Economic Forum, Agenda 2030, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the International Court of Justice, and all these, like, we want nothing to do with them. We want out of the WHO and da 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 da. Canada signed on to the international health regulations. Israel didn't. Israel and the United States are two countries, along with Iran, and it's an interesting mix of countries who have opted not to take part in the new so-called pandemic treaty under the guise of what are called the international health regulations, which were just updated. Israel has, nope, along with the United States, Slovenia, I think maybe even, I know Iran, there's about 7 or 8 countries that backed out, and it's an odd mixture. What do you think? What do you think, Etney? If you're still watching, or anyone else, I know it's a tough one. I know it's a very tough one because the media is playing the propaganda game. They're showing inflammatory pictures, and they're engaging in inflammatory reporting and intended to elicit an emotional response. Some might be apologetic for them, defend them, and say, well, they just want to get engagement. They're just, if it bleeds, it leads. It's clickbait. They're dying. No one pays attention to them anymore because they've been caught lying so many times before that viewership is going in the toilet. The only people watching CBC News anymore, 90% of their viewership is living in a long-term care home, and they don't know how to turn the channel on the TV, so they keep watching Ian Hannah-Mansing and the rest of the CBC News reporters. But why? What is this hatred? Vile, disgusting hatred of Jews and all things Jewish, and this double standard that we see all the time. Ethnic cleansing. Do you know, like, there are at least 5 or 6 cases of ethnic cleansing that are going on right now globally, but no one cares. Throughout Africa, we have Sudan going to the International Court of Justice and claiming that is genocide and ethnic cleansing taking place in Sudan, supported by the United Arab Emirates. This is pretty much Arab on Arab. They're both part of the Islamic world. And what does the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, say on this issue? They say, well, we don't have jurisdiction. It's not our purvey. We can offer no opinion on this whatsoever. Oh, but if there are accusations leveled against Israel, we're all over it. But Sudan, we don't care. Hundreds of thousands of civilians killed in Yemen and violence between the Iranian-backed Houthis and the Saudi-backed Yemeni government. Kill hundreds of thousands, kill 200,000 kids under the age of 5, dying because of the conflict, starvation, or because of a lack of basic medical care. Crickets from the media. Crickets. Whale oil is going, dang, got here late, going in 2 times, see you in a while, no problem. I'll wait for you to catch up. We've only been going 36 minutes, so I'll see you in 17 minutes or so, 17, 18 minutes. It's just, when it comes to ethnic cleansing, no one knows about ethnic cleansing better than the world's very small Jewish population. They have been ethnically cleansed out of England, out of France, out of Spain, out of Portugal. Tisha B'Av, there's a day on their calendar, and I forget where it lines up, but it passed just recently. It's a horrible day in Jewish history because all kinds of bad things happen to them on this day. It's like it's the Friday the 13th of Judaism. It's the worst day. Jews will not plan a wedding or travel or anything on this day because this is a day when bad things happen to Jews, and it's on this day, Tisha B'Av. Tisha is a number, Av is a month. So like the 13th day of the month of Av or whatever Tisha means, it is Friday the 13th, and it's the day when 500,000 Jews were slaughtered by the Romans during the Bar Kokhba revolt of 135 AD. It's when they were kicked out of France in 1492. And there are countless other examples of bad things that have happened. It's the day on which the Jewish temple was destroyed in AD 70. It's a bad day. Bad things happen to the Jewish people on this day. Eatme is writing, I've learned today that they are playing us, the same cassette, for over 100 years. It all stems down from the Pax Britannica, always waging war against the Russians, all those territories conquered. This is the thing. This is the thing. This is world history, conquest. The British, I'm living in what used to be, Canada is still a part of the British Commonwealth. We have this Westminster system of parliamentary democracy. Our head of state is King Charles, represented by the Governor General. The Governor General has to sign all our legislation into law, and that the Governor General is signing on behalf of the crown, of the king or queen. When it was Elizabeth Queen, now it's the king. But nothing becomes a law in Canada until it receives royal assent. Once the Governor General signs on behalf of the crown, on behalf of the king or queen, then that's called royal assent. Now we have a law. And look at Canada. And look at what we did to the indigenous population here. Look at what the British did to the French in Acadia, modern day Nova Scotia, around 1755. They came in, they conquered, they took all the French. They said, get in the boats, we're shipping you out. This is our land now. We won, we conquered you. It's ours. Look at what the Americans did to the indigenous population with the Indian Removal Act, which led to what is typically referred to as the Trail of Tears, where tens of thousands of indigenous First Nations people with attachment to the land going back thousands of years, maybe 10, 20, I don't know how many years. And they were forced to march, to leave their land and to go down to Oklahoma. We don't want that land. That's crappy land. We want the land that you've been living on and your ancestors have been living on since time immemorial. Get out. It's ours now. Every nation has done this. And and Jews as well. That's what happened to them. They were in the Levant, in Jerusalem, in Israel and Judah, and Rome came in and they ruled over them. And the Jews tried to fight back, and eventually they had their revolt in AD 70. They had another revolt in AD 135. And after that AD 135 revolt, Bar Kokhba revolt, 500,000 Jews killed, and then millions more were sent out, get out, what they called the diaspora, where Jews scattered to the four corners of the world. Get out. Some were enslaved and taken to what is Italy today, to Rome, to work on galley ships and the like. Others escaped along the northern coast of Africa and went into the Iberian Peninsula, which we know as Spain and Portugal today. And they were there for hundreds of years. And then, the Spanish Inquisition, ethnic cleansing. We don't want any Jews here. The Jews who eventually, when they went into captivity in Rome, eventually they gained their freedom. They moved out. They spread out across Europe. They intermarried. They became known as the Ashkenazi Jews. They went from Germany to France to Eastern Europe. There's this whole Khazarian Empire story that there is some validity to it. The Khazarians did adopt the Jewish faith. They had come in, these Jews, part of the diaspora, had interacted with the people living in what would today be Ukraine, Russia, that area of the world. They interacted with them, and the leaders of this Khazarian empire said, "Hey, we'll adopt your religion." But it didn't end the persecution. There was persecution against the Jews in Russia, in Ukraine, in Poland. Of course, we all know about 1930s, 40 Germany, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, kicked out of France, kicked out of England, kicked out of Spain. Nowhere, they're always a minority population, always hated. And some will say justifiably so. There is a pervasive feeling, there's a pervasive attitude of Jew hatred in this world, and it's distressing. So I'm reading Eat Me, what she has written, was to stick it up to the Russians, even the assassination of Lord Friedland. What started World War I was the assassination Ferdinand. Okay, I see. Typing, no worries. Yeah, the Archduke Ferdinand, who was the heir apparent to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Germany, and his assassination, and his wife, Sophia. That is typically cited as the cause or the start of World War I. I've always been of the opinion that World War I was a war that was predetermined and that they were simply looking for an excuse. From what I understand, Archduke Ferdinand, the guy who assassinated him, tried once and failed, his gun backfired or something went wrong, and then he took a second shot at him, and the second one was successful. But if that second one had failed and Archduke Ferdinand had survived somehow, they would have found another excuse to start that war. There had been competition brooding in Europe. The world had been pretty much already carved up. Everyone had gone in and conquered and genocided and ethnically cleansed their little territories of the world. The Spanish had rampaged throughout the southern hemisphere, South America, the Caribbean. The Brits had gotten their parts on the sun never set on the British Empire. The French still had remnants of their empire in places like the Caribbean. They had parts of Southeast Asia. Even the Dutch Empire had some holdings. The world was carved up. And so this was, it was almost like let's have one big final battle. Let's have a war to end all wars. That was one of the monikers put on World War One. It was called the Great War or the War to End All Wars. It wasn't called the First World War until we had a Second World War. Prior to the Second World War, the most common moniker stuck on that conflict was the Great War. Someone in 1920 would say, "Oh, I'm a veteran of the Great War." Anyway, so which led to the conquest of the Ottoman Empire. I suspect that it is the Crown who is behind the WEF and all that global goal nonsense. And the question I have to ask is, why are all these globalist forces now throwing in with the so-called Palestinian cause? Why? Open question. Why is Carney and all his little globalist buddies and countries like Australia and England and France and everyone, why are they all thrown in with Hamas? And Eat Me is writing that Ferdinand was a false flag to start a war indeed. I think the guy wasn't assassinated. I think he was genuinely assassinated, and I'm sure he wasn't in on it. Or his wife, both murdered, both killed by a Serbian. I mean, the way it went down is the assassin of Ferdinand and his wife was a Serbian. So after that event, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire declared war on Serbia. And then Serbia had allies, Austria-Hungary had allies, and the dominoes started to fall. And within a few months, the entire world was at war. Interestingly, the Ottoman Empire that Eat Me referenced was having trouble. Everyone was making alliances prior to the war starting because they knew it was coming. However, the Ottomans couldn't find a dance partner. They were left to two choices. Britain and the Western powers, the Allied forces, they didn't want to bring the Ottomans in on their side. And so the Ottomans were left, well, who do we side up with? And they had two choices, either the Germans, the Austrian-Hungarians, or Russia. And ultimately, late in the game, they threw their hat in with the Germans, with the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, because their opinion of the Russians was that the Russians would come in as Tsarist Russia, because remember, the Bolshevik Revolution hadn't taken place yet, that Bolshevik Russia would come and basically take over. And they didn't want that. And so they sided with Austria-Hungary. And what's interesting is most of the world's proven oil reserves at that point were in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, primarily. That's where all the world's oil is. And I've never heard this expressed anywhere. I came to this idea myself organically. I imagine others have had the idea, though, that 1914, when the war started, World War I, oil for the first time is becoming a major world commodity. We have the advent of motorized cars now. Horseless carriages are now starting to gain traction. Airplanes are nascent technology. They're starting to go off. Gasoline and oil is becoming an important commodity. And where are most of the proven oil reserves in the world? They're in the Middle East. Who has control of the Middle East? The Ottoman Empire. And it's almost like, was the purpose, or at least one of the goals of the First World War, was it to gain control over the world's oil supply? And that's something of a thesis statement of mine. I think I think that was at least one of the aims, and a primary aim of the First World War was to gain control over the Middle East, not for the Holy Land, not for economics. We want that oil. This world is going to need oil. We're going to build more cars, more planes, more ships. We need more oil. Just differing view. But I wanted to get back to, this irrational hatred, vile hatred of Jews and all things Jewish, and how, the double standard that plays out. There is this pervasive narrative that many will have heard, that Jews control the world, that they control the media, that they control our politicians, that you can't say anything bad about the Jews. Fair enough. Because I'm trying to think, Jewish Defense League, JDL, I think is the name, the Israel and Jewish organizations do fight to control the narrative. They do fight to control the narrative. And my simple question would be, well, can you blame them? Seriously? Look at everything they've experienced. They've been hated on for 2,000 years, pretty much. For 2,000 years, they have been hated on, accused of kidnapping children and drinking their blood, and all kinds of other crazy stuff. And so they, when they get a nation, they manage to conquer a little sliver of land the size of New Jersey, which was their ancestral homeland. It was the, birthplace of Judaism. And they managed to secure that after a brutal and bloody war against against the Arab League. At 700,000 Jews, many of whom were either formerly displaced European Jews or Sephardic. If you don't know the distinction, the Sephardic Jews are the Jews that went along the coast of North Africa and made their way into Spain, Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. Those are the Sephardic Jews. They tend to be more genetically linked to their ancestral population. And then there are the Ashkenazi Jews, who they were the ones who went through Italy and then migrated and went France, Germany, into what is now Russia and Ukraine area. So you've got two. Now they're all Jews. They're also Jews from Ethiopia. Judaism is not a race, and it's a difficult term to define. The best description I have heard is to call it an ethno-religious group. This is not entirely ethnic. It's not entirely religious, but that's part of it. For some, it's simply a cultural definition. There are people who identify as Jews, but they never go to synagogue. They never read the Torah or the Tanakh, or the Talmud or any of their other religious books. And I cover off one other little point. The Talmud. Those who hate Jews love to say, in the Talmud it says this, and they don't even know what the Talmud is. It's not a religious text. The religious text is the Torah, the first 5 books of what Christians call the Bible, and sometimes referred to as the law. That's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's the Torah, or Torah, or however they say it. And then the remainder of the book, starting from, I guess, Joshua and then through to Malachi. I'm horrible. I should know. Is it Micah? Is it Malachi? Just bugging me that I can't remember. Here we go. Malachi. That is the Tanakh. What is the Talmud? The Talmud is like a centuries-long argument between rabbis. That's all it is. It's rabbis arguing over the Torah and the Tanakh and trying to, uncover the mind of God. And were some of those rabbis hating on Jesus Christ? Probably yes. It's not entirely 100% clear. Jesus, the name Jesus, is derived from the name Joshua Yeshua. And Jesus is a Greek rendering. It's a Greek transliteration of this Hebrew word Yeshua. And it went from Hebrew to Aramaic to Greek and into English. It's the same way we get this term Palestinian. Palestinian is actually Philistines. Just as Jesus is actually Yeshua, Palestinians are actually Philistines. That area of Gaza is referred to in Old Testament times, going back to King David. That's referred to as Philistia, the land of the Philistines. But the Philistines were not actually Middle Eastern. The Philistines of that era were from the Greek islands. It was called Thrace, Thrace, back then. Anyway, Emi wrote something else. There must be a reason for all that hate, and Israel was never the homeland of the Khazarians. North America was never the homeland of my ancestors. Nancy, I know your last name. Was that Francophone? I almost said it. I'm not going to say your last name, but your ancestors. You might have mixed heritage like me. I'm English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh. I have no connection whatsoever to this land. The Jewish people. That is where Judaism started. That is where Moses led the people out of bondage in Israel to the banks of the Jordan River. Then he went up to the mountain. God granted him the ability. He allowed Moses to see the promised land, but he didn't let him cross. It's Martin Luther King's favorite. In Martin Luther King's last speech that he ever gave on the night before he was assassinated, said, "I have been to the mountain and I have seen the promised land." It's rather prophetic on MLK's part, because he was, after going and being able to see the promised land, going up to the mountain, after that, Moses died. After Martin Luther King got up and gave a speech saying, "I have been to the mountaintop and I have seen the promised land," then he died. Anyway, so there must be a reason for all that hate in Israel. Okay, part of the reason for the hate, and I've read up extensively on this, there's Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Erasmus, and another of other early church fathers, so-called fathers of the early church, not members of the first church, though. These were all Roman converts to Christianity. And Justin Martyr hated Jews, hated them, probably even before becoming a Christian, just hated Jews. And here's a great one. It was either Tertullian or Justin Martyr. I've read so much on it, it's easy to confuse stuff. Was basically expressed the opinion that the reason that the Jews were given the law, the Torah, the Ten Commandments, and all the rest, is because God had to rein them in. They're such an evil, horrible people. They needed the law. Us good Romans didn't need it. We're better than them. We're better than those horrible Jews. It was the attitude of so many of the early church founders, not the founders of the actual church. I'm not about Peter, Paul, and the apostles, but those who came after them. And they took it over, and they Jews were the ones who killed Jesus. No, you know who killed Jesus? I did. You did. We killed Jesus's death was an atoning sacrifice for our sins. God authored it. God prophesied about it and authored it. And yet people love to blame the Jews. Oh, it's the Jews. Okay, now I'm going to read what Nancy has written. There must be reason for all that hate, and Israel was never the homeland of the Khazarians. This is why I have issues with given homeland, considering that during the Russian program, many fled to England, angering the British population. They gave them a land because England wanted them out, even though it was a guaranteed powder keg. That is true. England and France is called the Sykes-Picot Agreement in the closing days of World War I. November of 1917, the war ended March or April of 1918. So the war was winding down, and everyone knew that Britain was going to win. And so that's when this famous Balfour Declaration was issued. Balfour was the British Minister of the Interior, and he wrote kind of an open letter to the Jewish people of the world and said that that Britain would look favorably upon establishing a Jewish national homeland in what at that time had been the Ottoman district or province of Syria. But they knew they were going to take it over. I have heard propagandistic twistings of the story that said, well, the Balfour Declaration was a quid pro quo. And what it was this is that the Rothschilds said, we'll get the US to join the war if you promise to establish a Jewish national homeland in the former Ottoman territory, on the Levantine coast there. And that I actually believed this for a time, but it doesn't. It has no basis in historical reality because the U.S. joined the war in March, April of 1917. The Balfour Declaration wasn't issued until November of 1917. So this idea that the Rothschilds said, we'll use propaganda to get the Americans to join the war if you'll promise to give us, this little strip of land for a Jewish national homeland. Well, the U.S. had already joined the war. They'd been in the war for 8-9 months when the Balfour Declaration came out, and the war was over within a few short months anyway. The Balfour Declaration didn't come out till November of 1917. March, April 1918, the war was over. Britain was controlling the area. The mandate was formalized in 1920 at a conference in San Remo, Italy, called the San Remo Conference, and they diligentated. They said, okay, here, you get this big chunk of land that includes what is all of Israel today and all of Jordan. That's your, we'll call it the Palestinian mandate or the mandate for Palestine. You can have that. We'll give you a mandate that we'll call the mandate of Mesopotamia, which is basically Iraq today. You can have that. We'll give the French, you can have Syria, you can have Lebanon. That's a French mandate. And then Britain immediately started carving it up. They said they took their Palestinian mandate and they said, okay, our Hashemite friends who fought as our allies in the war, they just got kicked out of the Arabian Peninsula. So they're a ruling family with nothing to rule. Let's take Winston Churchill did this in Cairo. He took the Palestinian mandate and he took 77%. Okay, so basically he took 3/4 of Palestine and said, here, you can have a country, we'll call it Transjordan. It's on the other side of the Jordan. It's on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. There, that's yours. And then he turned around and said, okay, now I got this little tiny sliver left of the mandate. We've given 75%, over 75% away to the Arabians from the Arabian Peninsula. They can be the colonizing power over the people who we were ruling for a short time. This all happened in 1921, a year after the mandate was established. Then they had this little tiny sliver, and they'd signed the Balfour Declaration. They'd made a commitment to the Jewish Palestinians. They said, okay, now we'll give you a little piece here. And the Jordanians and the rest were like, no, we want it all. We want all of it. Well, we gave you 77%. Yeah, but we want the rest too. We want nothing for the Jewish Palestinians. And what we're dealing with is two colonizing populations. Jews who had come predominantly from Europe, and some from America and other places, but predominantly from Europe, and then Arabians who had come in from the Arabian Peninsula. These were not the indigenous people of the Levantine coast. These were Arabian colonizers and European colonizers. And both of them wanted the land. And Britain gave 77% of it to the Arabian colonizers under the rule of the Hashemite dynasty, who had lost rule to the House of Saud on the peninsula, where Arabians come from, where Arabs come from. So it drives me crazy. So Emi has admonished me to keep reading before coming to an emotional defensive. Let me read. Sephardism or Sephardic Jews are only 10%. Oh yeah, we're going back centuries. The Bar Kokhba revolt happened in 135 AD. We're coming up on 2,000 years ago. And obviously human populations, it's like me. Look at me. I'm English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh. I mean, if I'm told to go back to where you came from, which, if we're going to be consistent, if Jews are expected to go back to Europe, well, so I'd be expecting, but what are you going to do? Carve me up a quarter to, I got to send part of me to the four corners of the British Isles? At the end, my ancestors or England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Britain, of which, I'm a British stock, they came over, they conquered this land. And that's how I got to stay here. The Jewish Palestinians conquered their, the Arabians. And so they get to stay there. Same rules apply, in my view. I try to be consistent. I don't have a double standard. Well, for me, it's okay, but not for the Jewish Palestinians. They're not allowed to have their country. They got to give it back to a different colonizing group, the guys who came from the Arabian Peninsula. Let's go on. If we're going to base where you live, it has to be based on ancestral DNA. I don't know. You have to. Do we all have to do a 23andMe or an ancestry.ca nasal swab test to determine where we get to live? I mean, whichever, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Well, you're 32% Scottish, so you're going to Scotland because the other three are less than 32%. I don't know. And Emi is going to say they believe that they can only return to land when their Messiah comes. I know when it comes to the Jews living in Israel, and there are Sephardic Jews living in Israel, at least those who used to be. I mean, they're all Israelis now, and there are Ethiopian Jews. And they're all coming back. They're all coming back. Jerusalem is the holiest city in Judaism. The most holy site in Judaism is the Temple Mount. And yet, and this is mind-blowing, when October 7th happened, Hamas gave it a title. They called it the Al-Aqsa Flood. Al-Aqsa is the name of the mosque. That was after Muhammad had died. Muhammad never even visited Jerusalem when he was alive. There's no writing in the Quran or any of the Hadith or any of their other writings about Muhammad actually visiting Jerusalem. However, what is written in the Quran is that in a magical nighttime journey on a winged that Muhammad went from the nearest mosque, which would either be Mecca or Medina, to the furthest mosque. And the furthest in Arabic is Al-Aqsa. Went from the nearest to the furthest. But when Muhammad was alive, there was no mosque in Jerusalem. What I'm trying to remember, what do they call Jerusalem? They renamed it. They call it Al-Quds. He'd never been there. And there was no mosque built there. That mosque, look into it. It didn't get built until after he was dead. So it would have to have been that magical nighttime journey must have taken place outside of time. He must have traveled into the future if he was to go to Jerusalem, because when he was alive, that mosque had not yet been built. And what happened is eventually that when the Arabians started conquering a large part of the world, North Africa, they went all the way up into the Iberian Peninsula. The reason why Spanish has a lot of Arabic influences, El Dorado, El Gordo, El this, El that. That's an Arabic influence on the Spanish language. They conquered a large part of the world themselves. And after they conquered Jerusalem, they renamed it, I believe the name Al-Quds, and then they built a mosque. And Jerusalem was not a major city in the Arab world. There was Cairo, well, obviously Mecca and Medina, number one and number two most holy sites in Islam. And then there's this third holy site, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the furthest mosque. And well, where was it? No one knows, except that the caliph, the guy ruling Jerusalem, Al-Quds, has a mosque built. What are we going to call our mosque? Let's call it the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now we're an important city. Now we can compete with Cairo, with Tunis, with Tripoli. We're important now. We count. We're the site of the Al-Aqsa. Oh my gosh, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I read about that in the Quran. Here it is, built after Muhammad had already died. And this is all verifiable. Check it out. So, you know, it's okay for the Arabs to come over from the Arabian Peninsula and conquer the land, but it's not okay for Jews to come from Europe and conquer the land? What world are we living in? Broken, fallen, sinful world. Anyway, Emi is then writing, this is why they go way back and forth in front of the Wailing Wall to impregnate it for the coming of their Messiah. Well, I know what I know of the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall is the western wall of what is believed to have been the Temple Mount. It's a retaining wall, and it's believed, some believe, I think that it's like the foundational stones of the old, the second temple. And visitors go to the Wailing Wall and they'll write a prayer down on a piece of paper and then they'll put it in to the between the cracks. And as far as the nodding when they pray, I haven't heard anything. I know that they believe that, right? And this is the thing. What do Jews believe? Well, there are different branches of Judaism. There's Hasidism, just like we have, in Christianity. What do Christians believe? Well, are you talking about Catholic, Coptic, Eastern Orthodox, Protestant? Are you talking about the Anglican Communion? Which Christians are you talking about? Well, what do Muslims believe? Well, are we talking about Sunni? Are we talking about Shia? Are we talking about Wahhabi? There's another group, I can't remember the name, they're branches within Islam. So, people say, well, what about Jews? What do they think? Well, are they Hasidic Jews? Are they this Jews? Are they that? Are they Orthodox, conservative, reformed? Or, what school do they belong to? There are differing views, but do know that um, Jews who are in Israel overwhelmingly believe that they are, they are occupying their ancestral homeland, and that typically the ones who hold to this view that Israel should not exist, that they're in New York City or somewhere else in the world. They're not living in Israel, in a country that they don't think should exist. If they're in Israel, they're there because they think it not only should exist, but they're ready to defend it. Amy is saying that she has American Indian blood. They can't tell me go back home, already am. Well, how much? I think there may be maybe a small trace element of Ojibwe ancestry in my family, because my dad's father and his father, and going back several generations, back into the at least the late 1800s, were from Manitoulin Island, and Manitoulin Island is unceded Ojibwe territory. And my blood type is the wrong blood type for a Caucasian, white, blonde, brownish blonde hair, blue eyes. I got the wrong blood type. I'm B, and that blood type is predominated by Asians and Native North Americans. So I think it's possible I probably have a teeny little bit of, I don't claim indigenous background, simply because I'm a child of God, and we all are. And full stop, end of story. Doesn't matter what little corner of the world you came from. I'm occupying land that didn't, along with a lot of people, if we go back 4 or 5 generations, all my, all my ancestors, including my dad's father and his family, they were from England. So anyway, um, Amy is saying, let us be very clear that the Hadith are heresy on the Prophet that the first caliphate commissioned. I have so much difficulty with Islam, because Islam, on the one hand, contends that Jesus was a prophet, and that the scriptures of the Jews and the Christians, meaning the Old Testament, New Testament, that these are um, that they are to be obeyed, that they are to, okay. So you're affirming the validity of the Old and New Testaments, and you're saying that Jesus was a prophet. Well, what did Jesus prophesy? Jesus prophesied that, an evil, wicked, and adulterous generation seeks a sign, but it shall be given no sign but the sign of Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days in the belly of the great fish, great whale, so too the Son of Man will be buried 3 days in the earth and will rise on the third day. Jesus repeatedly prophesied that he was to be crucified and would rise on the third day. So if Muslims contend that Jesus is a prophet, well, how do you know how do you know if a prophet is a prophet? It's when his words come true. And yet they, at the same time, they call him a prophet but deny his prophecies. You talk about a paradox. The Quran speaks to the validity and the God inspired reality of the Old and New Testaments. God took us backwards. God called on a warlord, an illiterate warlord, who basically looked around on the Arabian Peninsula where he lived. He never left it during his lifetime, except for the magical nighttime journey where he went to some unspecified place, just the furthest mosque, furthest worship place from where I am. We don't know where. It's up until in Jerusalem they built a mosque and called it the furthest mosque, Al-Aqsa. Anyway, so Muhammad's living on the Arabian Peninsula. There are Jewish communities, there are Christian communities. He looks and he says, how often do you guys pray, you Jewish guys? How often do you pray? 3 times a day. We're 5. We're better than you. We're going to do it 5. When you pray, how do you do it? Well, we bow our heads. Oh, you bow like that? Yeah. Oh, we're going more. We're going on. We're bowing right down to the ground, head right to the ground. We're better than you. You do the circumcision thing? Yeah. Jews say, yeah. Well, when do you do it? 8, when the baby's 8 days old. Not us. 13. 13. You Jews don't even remember your circumcision. Every Muslim man remembers his. If you haven't done it 13, you're damn sure you're going to remember that. We're better. He created a new faith. And the law under, in the Torah, in the Pentateuch, in the Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the law is merit-based. Got to earn your way to heaven. And then Jesus came along and said, no, you cannot earn it. The law was given to you as a mirror so that you can see that you can never earn it. You can never reconcile yourself to a perfect and holy God. And the wages of sin is death, and I'm going to pay the price on a horrible, lowly, despicable cross. I'm going to die the worst death imaginable to atone for the sins of mankind, so that who the Son sets free is free indeed, because I will have freed you from your sin. And then Muhammad comes along and goes, nah, forget that, Jesus. There was no atoning sacrifice, even though he prophesied it. Even though the Old Testament writers prophesied it, it didn't happen. There are so many contradictions within the Islamic faith. I can't. Means writing sway back and forth. Sorry for the type. Don't worry about the typos. Salafists. And if they do, it really, World War III is coming. World War III is coming. And it'll stop. It'll be ended. The king is coming back. And just an FYI, The Chosen Season 5 is now on Amazon Prime Videos. I know, but I don't have Amazon. Many will know I don't have a cell phone, And so, I don't purchase and I watch things like on Tubi or anything free. I'm not paying anyone for anything. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. But I cannot believe that we have CBC News, to get back to the original, and the links are down there below. You can look at the news story on their crappy biased reporting. Then you can check out the quote unquote the fake journalists they use to for the picture. And this guy's got a Palestinian flag in his profile pic on Instagram. That's not journalism. And for what it's worth, Israel engages in propaganda as well. That's what happens in war. Both sides engage in propaganda. And Jews, do they try and influence world opinion? Yes, the same way that Palestinians are. And can you blame them, given the treatment that they were basically a wandering population? Remember that ship that went to New York, to Canada, and a few other places, looking to escape what was coming in Germany in the 1930s, and no one would take them. No one would take them. Anyway, that's enough. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord God Almighty, may he grant you peace. Thank you for showing up, Beat Me. I know we have differing views on that, and that's all cool. I mean, at the end of the day, we will see what happens. I have my view. I think we're just moving towards this, and I think God is letting it happen. Absolutely, and God has seen the end. God exists. The God of the Bible exists outside of space and time. He knows the beginning and the end. He is the Alpha and the Omega, and so he knows the script. And whereas we stuck in this temporal plane constraint, and we tend to think of time as having a start and end point. It starts when we're born and it ends when we die. Well, now, and God exists outside of that. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God exists, in the beginning, time, the heavens and the earth, matter, space, a trinity of creation. God created space, time, and matter, and he exists outside of that. And even theoretical physics informs us now, and you could even call it applied physics, because we have the Higgs boson particle, they call it the God particle. We know now empirically that there are other dimensions, there are other realms. Some theoretical physicists contend there's almost a limitless number of alternative dimensions, realms, and that we get into the whole concept of the multiverse and all manner of other things. Eatme's writing a fun fact. Roseanne, the actress, the famous Roseanne show, she has her own podcast now, keeps talking about a new movement called Islam. Oh, great. And how the elites plan to toss this as the new global religion. I would invite you to look up. There's an Abrahamic worship center in the Middle East. I think it might be in Jordan, maybe Qatar. I'm not exactly sure where it is, where the physical location of it is. And it's called like an Abrahamic worship center or something of that description. It must be remembered that Abraham is considered the patriarch of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, because Abraham, his wife, was beyond childgiving years, and God had prophesied that he was to have a son. And his wife, Sarai, realizing that, hey, not producing any more eggs, gave to Abraham her servant woman, slave Hagar, and said, "Here, you can sleep with my maid servant, and she'll give you a child." And so he obeyed his wife and had a child by Hagar, and that child's name was Ishmael. And Ishmael is regarded as the progenitor of the Arab world, which would later become the Muslim world. Much later. Islam didn't come along until 500 or so years after Jesus. And of course, Abraham then miraculously had Jacob. No, Isaac. Sorry, Abraham, Isaac, and Isaac then had Jacob, and then you have Israel. So Ishmael is the progenitor of the Arabian people, the Islamic, which would become the Islamic people, and Isaac, Jacob, Jewish. So you got two, and of course, out of Judaism, Jesus was Isaiah 53, the suffering servant as prophesied in the Psalms and throughout the Bible. Born of a virgin in Bethlehem from the house of David. And be crucified is closed, divided up. All the prophecies that came through. I don't know, it's 30, 40 different prophecies, maybe 100. All tick, 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 tick. Jesus, 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 Jesus. Uh, and anyway, so there's this new Islamic center that is linking the three together, and I've heard about that. Haven't looked at it for a while. It's been over a year now, but I'm convinced it's coming. Christianity is definitely under assault. The truth is always under assault, but eventually, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. So anyway, God bless. An hour and 30, way too long, but I'm not working tomorrow. I got a day off. I've just worked 8 of the last 9 days. Out of the last 9 days, I worked 8. So if if I was a little tired tonight, that's the reason. I'm gonna take a night off tomorrow, but I'll be back Friday, Saturday, one of the two, or maybe both. We'll see what happens in the world. God bless, and we'll see you again. And hit like, share, and subscribe if you like the content. Cheers.